Hi, everyone. For everybody, I'm Anna from GreenGeeks, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, AI Crash Course for WordPress User, with our guest speaker, Keanan Koppenhaver, founder of Floorboard AI. So we're so happy to have you here, Keanan, and I want to say real quick a couple of things about GreenGeeks for those of you who may be watching us and may not be familiar with us. We're a 300% green energy web hosting provider, which essentially means we put back 3 times the amount of power we consume into the grid in the form of renewable energy. And we have been recognized by the US EPA since 2009 as a Green Power Partner. We offer share hosting, reseller hosting, VPS, and dedicated server. So now let's move on to a couple of housekeeping items for the webinar. If you have any questions like you come up with during the presentation, will you please put them in the Q&A, and Keanan can be answering them at the end of the presentation. And you're always welcome to chat in the chat room. Just remember to select everyone if you want everyone to see what you are discussing. And as always, we're recording this presentation. So if you have to step away, don't worry, since we will be sending the recording in a couple of days to everybody. So, and finally, we have enabled live transcription. So you have the ability to enable it during the webinar by clicking on Show Captions icon. First, I'm going to introduce from our team, GreenGeeks team, Erica, who's here today and will be helping us with the chat and the Q&A. Hi, Erica. Do you want to say hi?
Thank you, Anna. Hello, everyone. I am Erica Barbosa. I am from Costa Rica, and today I'm going to be assisting the chat. Hope you enjoyed today the webinar, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. I'm going to say a few words about Keanan. Keanan is a longtime WordPress developer with experience on all types of WordPress builds, from a local grocery store to rollingstone.com. He's currently working on Floorboard AI, a site to educate business owners and developers about what's possible with AI and help them start to use it in their day-to-day work. So welcome, Keanan. Would you like to say hi, to say something about yourself, and then start sharing your screen and the presentation?
Of course. Hi, everybody. Happy to be here. Anna, thanks for the intro and excited to be able to present to everybody. So we've got a lot of things to go through today, so I think we'll just get going. I will share my screen here. We'll get started.
Thank you.
Cool. Yeah, so like Anna mentioned, this is the AI crash course for WordPress users. I'm Keanan. This is my kind of social handles almost everywhere. Luckily, my name is pretty unique, so I'm easy to reach most everywhere, and available via email anytime. So this is an example of an AI generated image. This down in the bottom right here, you can see the prompt that was used to generate this image. You can see that this prompt is very specific, and a lot of the pieces of this image match up with what the user requested. We see it's a 2-shot. We see a man and a woman. We see the details on her jacket that were requested were accurate. And I don't know about you, but to me, it's pretty crazy that this is kind of the state of where we are with AI and these sorts of tools. At the same time, a few months ago, a bunch of hackers gathered at a conference called DEF CON, and some of the top AI tools and providers brought their tools there to see kind of where the gaps were and what was going on with their tools and if they could be broken into. And the hackers basically performed a capture the flag style challenge where they were asked to get the AI to reveal certain information that it was supposedly trained not to reveal. And relatively easily, someone got it to reveal kind of a fake credit card number that they weren't supposed to. And so to me, at the same time as we can generate all these amazing kind of images and things, it's also a little wild that this is also the state of AI, and we have a long way to go with some of these tools. So this is going to kind of be an overarching theme for our presentation today. Is a lot of the AI tools that I'm going to show you are amazing. They still require a lot of human involvement to be the most usable and useful that they can be. But with some human input, they work incredibly well. This slide itself is a great example because I originally wrote something here that was twice as long and way too wordy. And I asked ChatGPT to help me edit this down and make it a little bit more punchy. So we'll come back to this a few more times during our talk today, but that's kind of an overarching theme is the tooling still requires human involvement. We're not at Iron Man Jarvis kind of level yet, but they do work incredibly well when there's a human in the loop. Here's an example of what happens when there's not a human in the loop. A Chevy dealership basically hooked up ChatGPT, which is a tool we'll get to later, to their customer support chatbot. And this person basically convinced the chatbot to sell them a 2024 Chevy Tahoe for $1. And you can see some of the humorous output here. I don't know if this is legally enforceable, but it's a good example of why we always want humans working with these tools. So like Anna said, I'm Keanan. A little bit about me. I have over a 10-year history in WordPress, everything from small local sites all the way up to working on WordPress sites for likes of Rolling Stone and NASA. So I've kind of seen it all. I'm an aspiring private pilot. I'm a flight sim nerd. That'll come into play a little bit later. And like she mentioned, I recently started Floorboard AI because I feel like there's all this information circulating on Twitter and a bunch of other places about all these new tools, but it can be kind of difficult to know which ones are important and how to actually use them, as opposed to just them being something cool for you to look at and be amazed by. And part of the reason I'm here today is I'm convinced that a lot of this new AI tooling is going to be kind of a technological shift and a workflow shift on the scale of kind of when the internet was invented. So I want to do my part to help explain it to folks and make that happen. So feel free to take notes. Like Anna said, you'll get a recording of this, but if you want to get a kind of text blog post version of this talk, in addition to being able to download the slides, this is the URL where you can do this. We'll put this back up again at the end. But all of the links to all the resources and everything are available at this link right here for everybody to download if you want to go take a look at that. Let's dive in a little bit. When we talk about AI, there are a lot of different kind of subfields of AI, different things that people think about when the term AI is thrown around. And some of those are here, right? Neural networks were a huge topic a few years ago. People were talking about them a lot, kind of computer networks that emulate how our brain works, tools like machine learning and robotics. They're all different areas of AI and way more than we can cover in an hour-long presentation. So today we're going to talk about generative AI, and this is the set of tools that has kind of exploded over the past couple of years in particular, which is kind of a subset of artificial intelligence that's focused on creating new content or new data or new solutions. So using AI to generate something, which is kind of in the name. So we're going to look at three kind of sections where this breaks down. First of all, text, how AI can be used to generate text and help us do things like summaries and outlines and blog posts. We're going to look at how we can take text and use it to generate images, which some of you may have seen, for things like featured images for blog posts or things to share on Twitter, avatars for social accounts, etc. And then we're also going to look at how it can generate code, so things like scaffolding WordPress plugins, running database queries, things like that, where it can help you if you are actually a developer and want some help with your code that you're working with. So we're going to start with text. I'm sure some of you have seen and hopefully used this interface, ChatGPT. It's basically a chatbot that's hooked up to a generative AI engine on the back end. And you can see here these four boxes. It's giving you a few ideas about things you can interact with it with and ask it to do. And we'll see a few more examples of that. And ChatGPT is backed by what's called a large language model, which is an advanced AI system designed to understand and generate and interpret human language. So it's basically a model that understands natural language as opposed to, a web server that understands code or something like that. It understands natural language, whether that's English or another language. It does this by processing vast amounts of text data. So when they wanted to create the first large language model, they basically crawled a huge portion of the internet, terabytes worth of, Reddit comments, articles, blog posts, books, any bit of text they could get their hands on. And this massive corpus of data helps the model understand that natural language component that we were talking about. Then they basically pushed all of that into a giant supercomputer for days and days, and they spent a couple $1 million and they generated a much smaller file. It was still huge, but much smaller than terabytes, which is kind of a zip file, a compression of the internet, all the data that it took in and learned on. And these are known as the parameters of the model. You can go really deep into this if you want to learn much more about the technical side of how large language models are created. But for our purposes, we just know that they took a bunch of text data, compressed it all down, and used this to kind of train a model that gave it an idea of approximately what natural language kind of looks like and feels like. So now we have a large language model that can kind of use this compression of the internet to predict the next word in a sequence of words, given the context of what you give it and everything that it's learned online. So this is where people start to get into a debate of, are these AI tools thinking? Are they, do they have the ability to reason, or are they just kind of predicting? And we'll go through a few examples today, and I'll let you all decide for yourself. But that's what allows it to do things like this. I asked ChatGPT to generate a rap about WordPress in the style of Eminem. And because Eminem lyrics were in that giant corpus of data that it scraped from the internet, it has a general idea of the types of rhymes that might be in a song like this, the verses, and kind of how things flow. So it generated me a verse and a chorus here, which I actually think is pretty good. So again, if you want to see the full version of this link down here in the slides that you can download it'll take you right to, you can see actually the rest of this chat where I generated the whole set of lyrics. At the same time, it's not kind of a one task tool. It can also generate me an explanation. I asked it, explain to me like I'm 10 years old, the difference between the open source WordPress.org project and WordPress.com. And so it created this analogy to kind of Lego bricks, where WordPress.org, the open source project, is like getting a huge box of Legos where you can build anything you want, but then you need to figure out where you're going to put it, where you're going to display it, etc. And that's where a tool like GreenGeeks comes in terms of hosting. But if you use something like WordPress.com, it's like a special Lego play center where they give you some Lego bricks that you can use, not as many. You can't put them together in as many ways, but you know where you're gonna put your creation at the end. So I actually think this is kind of an interesting analogy and way to think about this problem. And again, this large language model is using the information that it knows about WordPress.org and WordPress.com to kind of generate this new description, like a person might if you asked them what the difference was. So we've been showing a lot of ChatGPT here, which is built by a company called OpenAI, but there are a lot more chatbots and large language models like this. ChatGPT is arguably the most famous. A company called Anthropic has a tool called Claude, which is a very similar chatbot to ChatGPT. Google just recently released their Gemini model, which does a lot of the same thing. Facebook and others have released open source models. So just like how WordPress.org is open source, there are large language models that you can download and run on your own computers, especially if you have a relatively new machine. And then an interesting tool that I really like and wanted to mention here is this Chatbot Arena. Basically what this does is it loads a new web browser window and it has two columns. You enter a single prompt down below and it uses two different large language models to generate responses and lets you pick which one you think is better. And then they maintain kind of a leaderboard of what people have chosen as opposed to the models that got chosen less often. And so they are able to kind of rank the popularity of some of these models, which is pretty cool. But it also lets you see that because the different large language models were trained slightly differently, they all do produce slightly different outputs. Some are better at kind of natural language writing, some are better at helping you with code, and that shifts over time as new versions of the models come out. So that's a good way to be able to compare. So let's take a look at how ChatGPT actually works. We can pop out here, and here's the ChatGPT interface. You can see down here, it also kind of maintains a history of some of the previous chats you've looked at. So you can go back and either continue those chats or just kind of reference them. But let's ask it for to generate an outline of an article, of an informative article, telling the reader how to get their private pilot's license, right? I've read a bunch of articles like this as I've been going through kind of my initial school and practice. They've been super helpful. So if we wanted to put an article like this on our own website, we could ask it for an outline for this. And so you'll see that it just kind of starts generating right away. And it kind of streams us the results. And so we can kind of read through it in real time. And the interesting thing about ChatGPT and these other chatbots is because it's a chat interface, as opposed to some other writing tools where if we wanted to make changes to this outline, we would have to start entirely over. This is just a running chat. So we can say, for example, this passing the exam section, maybe we want that up higher. We want it right after, understanding the eligibility requirements. Once it's done generating our outline for us, we can actually just ask it to modify the outline and, move that section up. So it's generated our outline here. It gives us a little kind of closing paragraph, letting us know what it was thinking about. And so we can just say, can you move the, what was that section called here? Passing the exams section up to just after the, let's say the understanding the eligibility requirements section. And basically the large language model has all of the context of the previous messages in your chat. So you don't have to give it, new, like all the same information every time. It can go back and reference things that you've already talked about up to a certain point, which makes, having long running chats very easy. And you're able to kind of have a back and forth sort of conversation with it. And so you can see here, now we have passing the exams moved up right under understanding the eligibility requirements. So we could go back and forth with this as long as we wanted to. We could ask it questions about specific bullet points if we didn't really understand what it was suggesting there. But in the end, very quickly, you can have an outline that is ready to start writing with just by asking a few questions through ChatGPT. Cool. So actually now we're going to take this into WordPress because this is a WordPress specific talk, and we're going to start to kind of flesh out this post a little bit using Jetpack AI. So we'll just grab this whole outline here from ChatGPT, just so we have it as a reference. And we'll jump over to WordPress here. We've got a post kind of drafted already started. And so we'll just paste our outline in here so we've got it for reference. And we want to say, let's see if we can get it to write our introduction. So we'll take this that our outline suggested. We'll format it a little bit here. And you can see I have the Jetpack plugin enabled. And when you have that enabled and Jetpack AI turned on, you get this little AI assistant here. And so what we're going to ask it to do is write an intro paragraph for our blog post detailing how to get its license. And then we're just going to say include and then paste in our guidelines from our outline, as well as general requirements and prerequisites. Right, so we're using what we've generated in our outline. We're asking Jetpack to generate it here for us. And you can see it takes a minute to kind of think about it, but it also has the same streaming sort of output where it just starts generating relatively quickly. And it will generate an intro paragraph here for us. And again, this is the kind of thing that I wouldn't necessarily recommend just like using this and moving on. It's a little bit lengthy for a paragraph, in my opinion. We could probably split it up here, things like that. But it's a good starting point. And we can also then ask Jetpack to say, okay, if we want to, change the tone of this, if we want to make it, more humorous instead. I don't know how funny Jetpack is, but we'll see. It's not just Red Bull cans and aviator sunglasses. So it is trying to include a bit of, personality, however may define it in here. And so you can kind of use these tools to just like iterate and get something that's pretty close to what you want. But again, we probably still want to have either the person writing this article or an editor or somebody go through this and make sure that it fits, the voice of our blog and all of that. But what's really impressive to me is like how quickly we can go from a blank page to having something written down that we can start to work with and edit. Which is really helpful to kind of solve that blank page problem. Cool. So taking a little bit of a look at text, let's talk about images. This is from OpenAI's homepage on their image creation tool. Basically, they gave their image model the prompt of a silhouette of a grand piano. You can see the prompt here on the right, and it generated this image for them, which is pretty impressive that our AI models can generate this sort of imagery. You can see they provided a bunch of style guidelines, the bold and vivid style of a travel poster, etc., which is helpful to get it to have the style that you want. But in a little bit less than a paragraph of text, you can get images out that look like this, which is pretty amazing. And OpenAI's image generation model is called DALL-E 3. Shout out to Salvador Dali, I believe. And basically, they've now integrated this into ChatGPT, which means that just like we asked ChatGPT to generate us an outline, we can ask it to generate us images for things. So here's an example where I pasted in an entire blog post that I had already written. There were things about election coverage and the news and Lego. Those are kind of the three topics of the blog post. And I asked it to generate me a featured image for this blog post. And so it read through the entire blog post. It parsed through, again, all of that natural language and used its image model to create an image here. And because, like I said, we're inside ChatGPT, again, we can ask it for revisions and edits without having to start from scratch and provide the entire prompt again. So I asked it to generate me a cartoon style logo for a restaurant called Pete's Za, and I wanted it to be a blue and green color scheme, which I think it did pretty well. One of the things you'll notice is that a lot of these image models, just based on how they're built, really struggle to generate accurate text. So if you want to have text in your images, it's probably best to add it yourself using a tool like Canva or Photoshop after you've generated them. You can see here it included an extra T, the ZA has an extra Z at the bottom, and the E, that second E is a little bit weird. So it's a good kind of starting point to get an idea, but again, it probably needs a little bit of manual intervention. So I looked at this and I thought it was good, but I figured for a pizza restaurant, maybe we'd want something with a little bit of a warmer color scheme. I know I asked it for blue and green originally, but I said, hey, can you generate me one with, an orange and red color scheme instead? And so what it did is it didn't need all of the context from the original prompt. It just said, okay, I know that we're generating a logo for this restaurant. We would just want it to be orange and red instead. And you see it gave me a few different options here in a few different sizes, which is pretty cool. So because this image generation tool is integrated into ChatGPT, it makes it super powerful if you're already in there, writing or generating outlines or things. Here's another example where I asked it for a design for kind of a directory listing of airports. So what I wanted to do is build, kind of a Yelp-esque website to showcase information about all the different airports around the country. The first version, when I didn't give it a lot of context, was pretty not what I was looking for. It's very kind of animated. It would be really tough to build this. And it's not exactly the style I was looking for. So another cool feature of ChatGPT and a lot of these language models is you can upload documents or images or things to provide it with more information as part of the prompt. And so what I did here on the left, you can see I sketched out relatively poorly what I wanted the site to kind of look like, what I wanted the things to include. And then I asked it again for a kind of more modern, simple, flat design. I gave it a little bit more information, and it generated me this image here on the right, which I think is a lot closer to what I was looking for. But I still think it could be even simpler. And so I told it that I was envisioning something that was similar to the kind of early versions of Reddit or like the Craigslist style design, very much just like simple text, relatively black and white. And again, that's kind of a theme here is the more information you can give it, the better. These tools are great, but they aren't mind readers. So if you can give it kind of as much information as possible on what's in your head, examples of things you've seen from the internet, because it's also seen a lot of the internet, these tools can be pretty powerful. So with the sketch plus thing that I wanted it to look like Reddit or Craigslist with a flat kind of color scheme, it gave me this iteration, which I think is actually pretty close to what I was looking for. Honestly, you can see a lot of the text is a little bit wonky, but things like, basic information, news and updates, it actually did pretty well. It shows kind of some placements for maybe icons here. And so, I view this as a very, very basic wireframe that I could maybe start to build from and flesh out, but I'm not a designer by any means. And so even having something like this to just kind of visualize and start to think about the layout of something like this that I'm building is super helpful and something that these image tools can accomplish pretty quickly. So again, DALL-E is kind of one example of these tools, but we have others too. There's a tool called Midjourney, which actually works inside of Discord. So you can chat with it inside of Discord. There are open source models again here. Stable Diffusion is an example of one. And products like Photoshop and others are getting imagery tooling built right into the software, which is really a nice kind of workflow enhancement if you're already using those sorts of tools anyway. So I just want to show quickly the difference of some of these. So this is the original that we looked at. I gave the same prompt to DALL-E inside of ChatGPT, which is that example we were looking at for the logos and the website generation. And you can see it gave me a similar but slightly different version. It chose a slightly different color scheme, things like that, but it's still very similar. I asked Stable Diffusion, which is the open source model, and it gave me a slightly different take on this. Again, we're giving all the same prompts to all these different tools. And I thought this was interesting. This is Midjourney. And this is, again, the bot that's inside of Discord. And this looks really impressive at first glance. And then if you look a little bit closer, we see this is another example of why these AI tools only work best with human involvement. Because if you zoom in here, you can see that this piano only has 2 legs, which I think it would be very difficult for this to stand up on its own. Also, the pedal box underneath where you press the pedals to make different sounds is pushed way to the center of the piano. So unless the person playing this has very long legs, they're going to have a lot of difficulty getting this piano to work. So I went back and said, we made sure that we want to have the piano have 3 legs, and we want to make sure that it's seen from the side. And again, giving the model this additional information and adding the specificity made it generate a much more kind of realistic image. So you see the piano now has 3 legs. The pedal box is moved much closer to the front where we would expect it to be because we've told it to have that sideways perspective. And this is overall a much better version of the image that we wanted. So OpenAI and Midjourney both have image galleries on their site where you can see just the kind of range of things that you can generate with these tools. And again, these are people kind of pulling from all sorts of different artistic styles and generating things that are honestly pretty wild to me that these are able to be created with just a relatively simple prompt. So here's Midjourney. Again, there's kind of product photos on the left there. There's sketches in the middle, some kind of 3D imagined things closer to the right. But up top, you see we've got things that look like they could be stills from movies and a lot of different styles represented here. Cool, so let's generate a featured image with DALL-E. So what we can do actually is we can go back to this very same chat that we had where we created our outline for our post. And we can just say, generate a featured image for this post. And we could just give it this one sentence prompt. It would make a lot of its own choices and it would be, we'd have to see kind of how it looked. But we want to maybe give it a little more guidance so it's a little bit better. So we could say showcasing a pilot next to his plane in a cartoon sketch style. So we give it a little more information about what we want the image to include, what sort of style we want, and hopefully we'll get something that's more accurate to what we're actually looking for. And so you see that in streaming, instead of streaming the output immediately, it tells us that it's going to work on creating an image for us. And it has this little progress bar. So we do have to wait a bit longer just because images do take a bit longer to generate than text. It's doing a lot of work behind the scenes there. But eventually here we get this image and you can see like it looks pretty good to me. Only exception being that the plane is kind of hovering off the ground. So we'd probably want to give it some additional feedback to correct that. But I think this is really good kind of first step. And again, it tells us a little bit about kind of what it was thinking, what elements it was using to generate this. So because this is a chat interface, we could again give it the feedback that the plane does need to be on the ground, the wheels touching the ground, etc. Just so that it makes something that's a little bit more realistic and usable for us there. Cool. So because large language models are just really text generating models, code is kind of just a subset of text. It's not natural language, but it's a specific version of letters and symbols grouped together, which large language models can understand. So it's also pretty good. These models are pretty good at writing code. ChatGPT can write code for us if we ask it to. It's very versatile. If we say, hey, generate us a HTML website that has these elements on it, it can do that. But there are also other tools, and we focused on ChatGPT a lot, so we're going to take a look at some of these others. GitHub Copilot is a tool that GitHub has released. It trained it on a lot of the code that developers like you and I have uploaded to GitHub. And it's able to, again, take natural language prompts and turn them into code based on its understanding of all the code that's been uploaded to GitHub. And Cursor is actually a pretty interesting example. It is a fork of the VS Code editor. So if any of y'all use VS Code to write your code, it's kind of a clone of that with a bunch of additional AI features baked in. So it allows you to just use it as a code editor if you'd like to, but it also has AI assistant tooling, which is pretty interesting. And so we'll take a look at that right now. So if we open Cursor, again, if you've used VS Code, this is an interface that looks very familiar to you. But you'll see here when we start to write some text here, we see Command L to chat, Command K to generate. So if you open one of those, it gives you a place to put a natural language prompt. So we're just going to say that this is going to be a simple WordPress plugin. So we're going to ask it to generate a plugin header for a WordPress plugin called, we'll just say Hello Dolly because that's a example that everyone's familiar with. So we just hit enter, and again, it kind of starts to stream here. Because Hello Dolly is a plugin that already exists, and it's a plugin that, because it's open source, these large language models crawled as part of the building process. You can see that it actually has the author already attributed, and so this is just a function of us picking a plugin that's already generated. But if we say, we're going to reject this and say, we'll call it Lorem Ipsum plugin. Oh, my shortcut there expanded that a little bit. Right, so it basically generates our plugin header for us. We can just click accept, and then all this code is just written in here. So this is a really good start of a plugin, and I have to look up this plugin header every time. I have to go click over to Chrome, Google it, figure out what the format is, remember it. And so if I can just while I'm typing, just ask it for it, that's super powerful. So if we actually want to fill out some of the functionality of our plugin here, we can say add a shortcode that the user and insert into a post to generate lorem ipsum text. I have this auto expansion thing that keeps firing. Sorry about that. So we ask it for that, and basically it's going to say, okay, we've generated this shortcode, right? So now we have a shortcode here, and it always returns this same text. We could ask it to do something like add a settings page where a user can upload their own placeholder text to be used in the shortcode. And it will start to generate all that stuff for us. So again, settings pages are something that I often struggle with, like remembering how to set up exactly correctly. And so we can kind of look at this code. And this is another example that this code is great and it's really quickly generated. But one issue that a lot of these tools have is they don't always follow the best practices for things like security, escaping inputs, etc. And so you want to make sure that there's a human still looking at this code and making sure that you're not inadvertently introducing any sort of security vulnerabilities or things that you'd want to avoid, just because sometimes these things do still make mistakes. But relatively quickly, we have like a scaffold of a plugin that we can start to kind of test and tweak as we need. And because this AI tool lives within your code editor, you can give it specific pieces of code that you want to include in the context of what you're asking it. So you can say, explain what this code does. And because you've highlighted this, it actually passes that to the large language model and uses that in the explanation. So this is all useful also if you're kind of trying to understand what someone else's code that you've downloaded does. You can use a tool like Cursor to ask it an explanation. And again, because it's a chat, you can ask it any follow-up questions. So if you want more explanation on what a shortcode is, for example, you can just ask that here and get a lot more information there, which is pretty cool. Cool. There's one more thing that I want to show y'all. We've talked about how large language models are great at parsing text. We've talked about how they're great at parsing images, and we've talked about how they're great at writing code. And so there's actually a tool that I really enjoy messing around with that combines all three of these things. And it's called Make Real. So it's by this company called Teal Draw. We're going to take a look at this. I'm crossing my fingers because this has been a little flaky today. But Teal Draw is basically this kind of infinite canvas where you can, whatever you want to do, you can like draw elements onto it. You can turn them colors, things like this. It's kind of a collaborative infinite whiteboard. And that was cool by itself. But a few months ago, they released this tool called Make Real, which basically takes their whiteboard and allows you to use AI to kind of bring to life the things you've sketched out or wireframed on the whiteboard. So you can see here that we've wireframed this little mini tool that has a shape, and it has two kind of sliders, and the sliders are labeled scale and rotate. The idea here is like this is a wireframe that you might give to a developer to say, hey, I want like a little widget that allows users to rotate this around or make the square bigger or smaller, and they might go off and write a bit of JavaScript, and you'll have some back and forth there. But what you can do with this tool, hopefully, fingers crossed, is you can highlight all the elements you want, and you can click on Make Real. And what that does is it starts to kind of fire off all of these elements and everything to a large language model. And basically it kind of parses everything that it can see, all of the text that's on the page, and it does its best to make real whatever you've asked it for. So we'll see how we do here. And you can see if we zoom in, and it does make it a little small. But if we zoom in, it's generated us, we can double click into this widget, and it's generated us an actual working piece of code where we can scale and we can rotate the square. So without any sort of JavaScript or anything from us, it's generated something here that we can actually use and actually works. This is code that you can open in CodePen or anywhere else, and this code actually does run completely independently of anything else, which is pretty cool. And again, because this is an AI model, we can ask it for revisions, right? So if we wanted to add another feature here, I've got these colored circles kind of pre-built down here. And the interesting thing about Make Real is that anything that's in red, whether it's arrows or text or anything like that, it uses as kind of comments. So think about just like how you can put comments in code. We can also put comments on our designs. So instead of annotating a wireframe or giving feedback to a designer, we can use one of our tools like this, and we could say, clicking on. Here, I'm gonna make this a little bigger. That's all the bigger it goes, huh? Okay. Clicking on these colors should change the background color of the square. Right? And so again, because this is in red, it knows that, okay, we're not actually asking it to put this text on the thing that we generate. We're more giving it feedback to actually on how the functionality should work. So again, we will highlight all of these. We'll click on make real and we'll cross our fingers again. And you'll notice that this is even slower than the image generation because it's doing a lot of sub steps. It's taking the text, it is generating some screenshots and images. It's doing a lot of different things in the background. But you can see here, we've got our sliders. Oh, sorry, we need to double click into it. We've got our sliders that work to scale and rotate the square. And then when we click on these colors here, we see that the color of the square actually changes. So this is super useful for just like pretty quick prototypes and things. But it's also pretty crazy, some of the stuff that people have built with this. So here's an example that I want to show really quick. Basically, someone sketched out this one-player Pong game where all of the sides of the game board are kind of reflective to reflect the ball back to the player. They just generated this very basic sketch, and this is a working game, which they then took and embedded on their website because the code was already all written there. So you can see that we can kind of increase the difficulty here, and it works to, we can use the arrow keys to move. And impossible truly is impossible. That's pretty impressive. So it's really pretty wild to me what these sorts of tools can do. And if you're willing to spend some time experimenting and again, using it in combination with your own intuition and knowledge, these tools work incredibly, incredibly well and are unlocking kind of a whole different set of problems that can be solved with computers and things that we can accomplish in general. So I'd love to take some questions now. I think we have plenty of time for Q&A. Yeah, but again, this is the best way to reach me here if you want to something that you want to talk about outside this presentation. And this link here at the bottom is if something caught your eye on the slides that you didn't quite catch, you can go there and download the slides. So thanks for coming, everybody. We'll do questions.
Yes, thank you, Keanan. That was awesome. I love the last two was great. I'm going to read a few questions we have in the Q&A from Stan. He's asking about copyright. What about copyright if I use inside my work that I'll sell?
Yeah, it's a good question, and one that is an open legal argument at the moment. I believe OpenAI, the makers of ChatGPT and the DALL-E image generator tool, do give you the copyright to the works that you create there. We can actually look and see. The kind of open legal question is basically what is being done about the inputs to these tools. So you can see here generated by the API. So that you would want to like read through their terms of use. But at the very least, the API, like things you make by calling the API, so that covers anything you would make in, Make Real or other tools that use it under the hood, is not covered by their copyright. The open question is they are currently in a legal battle with, for example, the New York Times on whether New York Times articles are legal to be used as training data for these large language models, or whether they are, copyrighted and should be removed from the underlying data set. So that is definitely a bit of an open legal question. Other sites like Reddit and other things are taking kind of a proactive approach and licensing their content to some of these large language model makers and vendors. But that's something that's still being sorted out for sure. So you want to be pretty careful to review the terms of use and things. But again, I also would not recommend taking the output of any of these tools and just publishing it as is. I would probably put your own spin on it and use it to kind of influence your work as opposed to being completely what you publish in and of itself.
Yeah, I agree. Sher is asking a similar question: is if I subscribe to the paid version of GTP for purposes of helping me write a book. Can I publish the book as my own?
Yeah, again, I would look at the terms of use here. I think they do distinguish between ChatGPT versus like using the API. So I would want to look into that, and that's probably something that I should look into and write something about. But yeah, for the most part, these AI tools are very well aware that they are, being utilized to create kind of other works, and because they've been trained on other information and works themselves, they are being pretty permissive with the copyrights at this point. So definitely, I would look at this kind of, if you're using ChatGPT in particular, the OpenAI terms of use. Anthropic has similar, but yeah, it's a good question. Something that is probably worth investigating.
Yeah. Then we have a question from Char. I've heard anything you put in AI is out there for anyone to see. Is it recommended to not use it for anything you don't want known in public? True?
It's a good question. Again, we'll focus on OpenAI here. So the line they kind of drew was basically anything that is done through ChatGPT. If you're not kind of paying for this product, they reserve the right to use like that as training data for the next version of their model. So that is definitely something to be considerate of. Again, like because of the way that the models are trained, it's not like someone can just like go look up your specific data. It's more just like everybody's information is like blended together and that sort of thing. But yeah, I would be relatively cautious about putting anything that was proprietary or, things like there have been examples of GitHub Copilot, like outputting people's API keys if they were committed into a GitHub repository. So for a lot of these free tools specifically, I would be a little bit cautious about that. There are versions of ChatGPT and tools that use this large language model under the hood that use it in such a way that don't leak your data like into the next version of the model. So if that's a concern for you, I would definitely recommend looking into those. But yeah, the ChatGPT as is, I believe the latest on that is that they kind of reserve the right to use your data in the next version of the model as part of the training.
Yeah. Thank you. Lark is asking, why not have ChatGPT write the article? How is Jetpack better for that?
The biggest reason that I wanted to show Jetpack is because again, like I am really interested more so in like ChatGPT is great, but it leads me to do a lot of copy pasting. So if I'm writing code in ChatGPT, I have to copy the code. Sometimes it gets misformatted. I have to bring it over to my editor, etc. Same thing with copying text. It happens that sometimes things get misformatted or doesn't transfer appropriately. So I want to show Jetpack as an example of like there are these writing tools that live directly inside of WordPress already. So it just makes it easier if you're trying to incorporate these tools kind of into your existing workflow. I always want to look for tools that kind of fit into what I'm already using, which is why I like using things inside of WordPress, Jetpack, and others. Also, Cursor for writing code, so I don't have to be constantly bouncing back and forth between a bunch of different tools.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Joel is asking if Jetpack AI is a plugin. Jetpack is a plugin.
Yeah, Jetpack is a plugin. If you're not familiar with Jetpack, it's kind of a one-size-fits-all plugin for WordPress that is put out by Automatic. And so they have a lot of different features in here, AI just being one of them. So it's definitely something to try out. Most of the features of Jetpack are paid at this point. You can see that if you look over here, that like you do get a free kind of trial of the AI assistant if you want to like see how good it is for what you're trying to use it for. So again, this is kind of a similar thing with all these tools. I would recommend trying them for free and seeing how they work. Most all of the tools that I showed here have a free plan. So definitely take a look at that. But yeah, the AI assistant is like a component of the bigger Jetpack plugin that they do charge for after a certain point.
Right. Kathy's asking, I am a designer. What would you recommend focusing on in order to still be employed in the next 3 years?
Sure. I mean, I will say I have a huge amount of respect for designers because again, it's not a skill that I have, and I don't think that any of these tools are, at the point of being even close to replacements for real designers. I think for me, like I use it to kind of like, instead of taking all my random ideas and like just giving them to a designer who's like would be overwhelmed by that and not find any of that super useful, I use it to just like get some iterations around like style and initial ideas. There are other tools that again try to do a similar thing where you can give it a prompt and it generates code or layouts. But as you can see, like none of these are going to be winning any design awards anytime soon. So I think that just being familiar with like ways in which these tools can speed up your workflow is helpful. That just makes you more effective and more able to take like your unique knowledge and really lean into that and not have to spend as much time on like things that aren't necessarily unique to you or unique that you know. So things like, image generation, if you want to generate placeholders or using something like this to generate wireframes that go straight to code, it is maybe helpful, but really just like be on the lookout for, if you use Canva or Figma, a lot of these tools are already kind of building in AI features. And I would say just like look out for those and see how you can integrate those into your workflow to make you more effective at what you're already great at doing.
That's a great suggestion. Joel is asking, how do you upload an image upon which another image is generated? How do you
Sure, good
upload an
question.
image?
Yep, good question. So I just want to circle back real quick. I found this modal in terms of like, does ChatGPT train on your data? There is this toggle in settings where you can toggle off basically you lose the ability to have your chats over here as a history, but you also prevent them from being, included in the training data. So if you want to do that, that's kind of a trade-off you have to decide to make. But you can kind of exclude your information from that. So as far as how to upload images for other images to be trained on, if you look in ChatGPT down here, there's this little paperclip, which is an icon you're probably familiar with Gmail or whatever. And this is where you can upload either text documents, images, PDFs, things you want ChatGPT to use as context for your whatever current conversation you're in. So that's where you would, just start a new chat. You could click here, upload an image. It would go down here, and then you could write the prompt, ask it to generate an image based on the attached image. Just tell it that you attached an image so it goes to look at that. And that's where you'll find that.
Ah, that's great. Thank you. Lisa is asking, I assume we will get the slides and links to all of these resources. Yes, we'll just have you will share the link, right? To all your resources. It's going to be on, yeah.
Yeah, and like I mentioned, this link will go out, I believe, in the email. I can paste in the chat if it'd be helpful too. But this version here basically you can grab all the slides, and then it kind of goes through, the same talk that we went through. So if you want to kind of zoom in on any of the images, we also have, the links to the different chats, like generate the wrap about WordPress. You can kind of see that here too. So all these links are here, and I think Anna will make sure you guys get those.
Yeah, we will get them to you. Sherry is asking, where or how did you bring in DALL-E within ChatGPT 4?
Good question. Yeah, so ChatGPT, the latest version, kind of tries to be intelligent about what you're asking it. So basically, if you just anywhere in your prompt ask it for an image or to have it generate an image, it knows that that's what you're asking it for. You don't need to explicitly include it as of the latest version. Same thing goes for, you can ask it to write code and interpret code, and it will do some of that for you. So there's no sort of explicit enabling of that's required. You just have to mention that you want to generate an image or something around that kind of language in your prompt, and it will do that for you.
Thank you. Alfred is asking, all of these prompts require clear specificity and direction from the user. Can you share insight on what should be considered to adequately frame prompts for GTP?
Yeah, it's a great question. I do find this whole kind of technology trend interesting because it kind of reverses the everyone should learn how to code trend of the past 10 years. It's now much more everyone needs to know how to communicate clearly, and a lot of the other sorts of fields are really kind of useful cross-functionally in this field. So I will say that OpenAI has published a guide to what they call prompt engineering, and basically they have really specific strategies here around things that you can do to get better prompts. So I can put this in the chat really quickly. But I will say another another useful tool here is really just trying things and seeing what output it gives you, and then refining your prompt based on what output it gives you. So I had a thing, for example, that I was working on the other day. I wanted to take a transcript of a Zoom call and generate kind of a case study from that. I wanted like a blog post of that, and I wanted it to pull out quotes that the person who I was on the Zoom call with actually said. And I noticed like after the first version, it was making up quotes that person hadn't actually said. And so I made sure to, in my next version of the prompt, say, please do not like hallucinate any quotes, or, make sure that the quotes you're including appear in the source material, et cetera. So there's always going to be, just like you have to debug code, you have to kind of see what the output of your prompts is, and iterate those accordingly. But there are a lot of resources out there for engineering better prompts.
Thank you. Melody is asking, what is the make real used for? How do we use it in real time for website or logo making?
Sure. So you can just go to makereal.tldraw.com. It will open up your own version of this whiteboard. You won't have what I have on here because this is just mine. But then you do need an OpenAI API key. So that's basically because it uses OpenAI's model on the back end to do the generation. You do have to bring your own API key there. But then, yeah, you can just kind of start using it. Once you have this kind of generated piece of code here, there should be an option somewhere here to actually kind of pull this out into CodePen or something like that. So you can definitely get this code out into other tools. And if you look, actually, you can look behind the scenes to see what it's generating for you. So this is the entire HTML of what it generated for us here. And so you can either, like, if this is an easy way for you to just grab this, you can. But basically, it relies very heavily on Tailwind, which is a CSS framework, if you're not familiar with that. So that's kind of required as a baseline. But this is, HTML that's entire, like you can just copy this and it's an entirely fully functional web page in its entirety to pull it out of there. So again, I wouldn't necessarily use this for like build me an entire production ready web page in one step. But if you're kind of experimenting with how you want a widget to work, or just to get something functional that you can share with someone and sort of work together on it, it's a really great tool for getting started.
Yeah, thank you. Merck is asking, would you mention again, if I'm in WordPress and trying to build my website, where do I go? Maybe the coding is what Merck is referring to.
Yeah, so if you're looking to like, again, get kind of a visual demo of things, that's probably like something like Make Real. The tool that I was using for actually like working on this very basic plugin was called Cursor. And I can put that in the chat. But basically, yeah, it's a code editor that you can download that you would use instead of whatever code editor you use today. And it has those AI features kind of built into it.
Thank you. That's great. We have another question from Joel. Can you ask it to create a video based on a still image?
Good question. There are tools that can do video. OpenAI released one relatively recently called Sora. It's still very early access. Like they're only letting a few people into it to kind of test it and make sure that it's working and not going to create anything super crazy. But you can see that like the videos that it generates are pretty impressive. If it's going to load here, I don't know if it will. There's definitely still like a few kinks to work out, but they gave it basically a single paragraph prompt, which you can see down here. And there's a bunch of examples of these. So this is still relatively early on. There is a tool called Runway, I believe, which does something similar. You can do video generation here. And I know that these tools are getting pretty popular. I know somebody actually who worked on kind of an end-to-end project where they wanted to create a documentary about one of their family members who was alive a long time ago. And so they took, AI generated kind of black and white imagery based on what they've known about this person's journal entries. They did AI generated voiceovers and some Ken Burns style kind of documentary video. And the end product, even though it was entirely like AI generated, again, it had a human in the loop, like guiding the creative process. But all of the actual kind of creative assets were AI generated. It turned out pretty amazing.
Great, thank you. Sherry is asking, if I ask ChatGPT to write a paragraph based on the following facts, will my facts become part of the ChatGPT database for others to see? Therefore, I shouldn't feed any private data? I think it's something you were showing earlier about.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think that's a pretty big concern. I think that a lot of folks have that question. So I will note again here that like there's this toggle inside of the settings in ChatGPT that you can basically toggle this off. It means you lose all of your chat history over here. You can't go back and see anything you've talked about before, but it does remove kind of your information from being trained on in new versions of the models. It's kind of an open question as to how much of that data will be included in the next version of the model. And again, like we mentioned before, it's not like someone can ask for your specific information from the next version of the model. But yeah, if it's anything that's like secret or proprietary, I'm always a little bit cautious about that, like putting that sort of stuff into these tools, just because it's not really clear, which is unfortunate, but that's kind of how it is right now.
Yeah, that's true. We have a question here from Melody. On TikTok, I saw an advertisement for an AI building website. What is your thought on using AI to build a website? I'm struggling building my website. Thank you.
Sure. I think again, like for these tools are really pretty good right now at doing specific things. If a thing takes more than one step, it's a little bit difficult for it to do all of those steps with one prompt, right? So building a website is an example of that. You have to decide what the general look you want is, what elements you want on the page, how you want them laid out. And then that's when you get down to writing the actual HTML and CSS and all that stuff that generates those sites, right? So what you could do is ask ChatGPT to help you start that process, think about what tools you want to use. And I actually did that relatively recently. I was starting a new project and I asked it to talk to me about what sort of coding languages I should use, how I should think about the project, what other services I needed, that sort of stuff. But again, it was a lot of like back and forth and like me asking it things and looking at its responses and asking it to be more specific or make changes. And so I'm a little skeptical about those like all-in-one, like just build me a website tools. I think some of them have some pretty impressive demos. But for real world use cases, I've seen a lot of like, okay, this is going to be a great 60% starting point, and then there still needs to be a lot of like manual work done on the back end. But if you're looking for kind of ideas, inspiration, that sort of stuff, that's what something like ChatGPT or some of these other tools are really good at. You can say, hey, like give me, ideas for color schemes or ideas for what's important to include, and ask it to kind of build with you and help you kind of scope out some of those ideas.
Great, thank you. Clara is asking if the version of ChatGPT you were using was a paid version.
Yes, so I am on the paid version of ChatGPT just because I want to use ChatGPT 4. It's a more capable model. It gives me a lot better answers, and it also lets you do DALL-E, lets you browse the web, things like that. That is on the paid version. But if you just want to kind of experiment with ChatGPT, you can just go to chat.openai.com. They recently just opened this up to be free for everyone. It just uses 3.5, which is a little bit less advanced model. It generates answers a lot quicker and is a lot kind of shorter feedback loop, but it can't do some of the advanced things that you can do on GPT-4. So yes, I do pay for it and use the paid version of this.
Great. Jan is asking recommendation for a website AI chatbot.
Good question. As we saw earlier, just whatever you do, don't just hook your website chat up to ChatGPT. That's a recipe for disaster. I think there's a lot in this area. I know Intercom has one that they kind of integrates with their support tools. I'm trying to think. There's one. Yeah. So this one, if you want to like give people answers from documentation, if that's kind of what you're talking about, there's this tool Docsbot.ai, and was at one point kind of WordPress focused. I think they've kind of branched out a little bit. But this is a really great tool to kind of let people ask questions about things that are already in your documentation and that sort of stuff. So definitely would recommend taking a look at that.
Excellent. Thank you. Dennis is saying the current versions of these AI tools were trained on internet content that was created by humans. future version will train on future internet content, which will increasingly be created by AI, which often makes mistakes and produces incorrect information. Will AI tools get progressively stupider, so less smart?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's definitely a real possibility. I think we're just now getting into like the next versions of the models will be trained on a lot of that data that includes AI generated stuff. So it'll be interesting to see. I think that that's always a problem, and it's something that actually security teams are concerned about by, the ability of, because we know these scrape the open internet now, hackers or people who are malicious, like putting things out on the internet that are, knowingly incorrect, or things that they can then use a future version of the model to like trigger and use as like an attack, is definitely a concern. So I think the big kind of AI providers are pretty concerned about how, like, safeguarding their models against that. But I do think there's some sort of risk in, the amount of incorrect data or things that are like very clearly just generated from other AI generated responses, spiraling a bit for sure.
Yeah. Grant is asking, can Gemini make images that compare to DALL-E?
I'm not quite sure about Gemini's image generation. I know that they, I think, suspended it for a bit, but it's possible that they've kind of reinstated that. It looks like maybe they have. I haven't tried Gemini for image generation a ton, so I primarily use DALL-E and Midjourney, but it's definitely something, like I said, all these models give you a little bit of a different look. So just kind of experimenting and seeing what works and what looks the best is the way to go.
Great. We have a couple of more questions. Raji, I'm not sure if I'm saying it correctly. How can we use ChatGPT to bring the website in Google ranking? And does the content used from AI will negatively impact the website design, the website in long terms? So it's talking about ChatGPT and Google ranking.
Yeah.
Google,
So a lot.
yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, so a lot of people have used AI to write content. You've seen an explosion of like websites having tons and tons of posts now. Google has been a little bit back and forth on how they see that. The kind of baseline is, if it's helpful to a person still, Google wants to rank it highly. So again, that's a case where, like, as long as you're not just taking the output from ChatGPT and like just putting it and publishing it, it's probably okay, and it can help you write a lot faster and get a lot of different ideas. But if you're just kind of creating spam with it, it's not going to be good for you in the long term.
Yeah, that's true. Sarah is asking, what file types are images outputted as? Can you get an SVG file? That's a good question.
I don't believe you can. I think, let's download this one and see. Yeah, it's WebP by default. So yeah, you would need to do some sort of conversion there. I don't know what capabilities it has to generate an SVG. I think something like this would probably be too complex for it to write the code for. But there are, WebP to PNG and PNG to SVG converters online that you could use.
Great. Michael is asking, is there any AI WordPress plugin that can generate posts automatically?
There are a couple. The one that I know of, I believe Bertha AI will do that for you. So it's not just writing. They've got a bunch of other features too. But yeah, definitely take a look at that if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And Sherry is asking, is Bing with ChatGPT a good internet search engine? What other search engines have good AI for searching and asking internet questions?
Yeah, I think Bing is kind of the leader of that right now. Google is starting to bring AI results into their search. And Perplexity is another one that I've seen a lot about. I don't know if you'd quite call it a search engine, but it's somewhere in between ChatGPT and a search engine, and then it like brings in AI results, but it can also, scope out and see things on the internet. So I would give this a try if you're looking for something like that too.
Thank you. Great. I believe we are getting to the end of our time, and I don't see any more questions. So if you can put the screen again with your contact one more time for everybody to see. Thank you. Great. Okay, so thank you, everyone, for following us, for the great questions, for the engagement, and thank you, Keanan, for all this information and the great presentation. Thank you, Erica, for your help. And can you just paste, if you could paste in the chat room, the next webinar for next month is going to be on a crash course, no, not crash course, but a block editor for beginners. So if anybody's interested, sign up. It's going to be a fun webinar. And I think other than that, if anybody has any question, they can contact you, right, Keanan?
Yep, absolutely. My email is there, or reach out to me on Twitter. I'm on Twitter all the time. So anywhere would be great.
Thank you. Thank you
All
so
right,
much,
thanks, Mel.
everybody. Thank you. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Keanan.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.